doctor who abandoned his wife in labor, only to find her on the hospital board years later. Dear viewers, welcome to our channel. Subscribe to receive more stories every day. The cabin stood alone against the vast expanse of snowy wilderness, a small speck of warmth in an otherwise frozen world. Inside, Sarah Hayes clutched her swollen belly, her breaths coming in shallow, desperate gasps. The contractions were growing stronger, more insistent, as the hours dragged on. "Michael," she whispered, her voice weak but tinged with urgency. "Hey, I need you to stay." Dr. Michael Hayes, her husband and a highly regarded surgeon, paced back and forth, his phone clutched tightly in one hand. Outside, a snowstorm raged, cutting off the already remote cabin from any semblance of civilization. The power had gone out hours ago, plunging the room into darkness save for the flicker of a lone candle. "Sarah, I don't know what to do here," Michael stammered, his usual composure replaced by visible panic. "This isn't a hospital. I don't have the tools or the equipment to handle this." "You're a doctor," Sarah snapped, her frustration cutting through her pain. "Our baby's coming whether you're ready or not. I can't do this alone." Michael ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. He had always prided himself on his ability to remain calm under pressure, to make quick, rational decisions in the face of chaos. But this was different. The storm had made the roads impassable, the landline was dead, and cell service was a distant dream. It was as though the universe had conspired to trap them in this moment, with no escape. "I'm going to get help," he said finally, his voice firm. "I'll drive to the nearest town and bring back someone who can help. An ambulance, maybe. Something." "Michael, no!" Sarah cried, her voice breaking. She reached out, grabbing his arm with surprising strength. "You can't leave me. Please just stay." But Michael had already made up his mind. He pulled his arm free, avoiding her pleading gaze. "I'll be back," he said, grabbing his coat and scarf. "I promise." The door slammed shut behind him, and Sarah was left alone, her sobs mingling with the howling wind outside. Michael's car skidded and slid as he navigated the treacherous mountain road, the storm's fury battering the vehicle from all sides. He gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white, his heart pounding in his chest. He had to make it to the town. He had to find help. That was the only thought anchoring him as the storm threatened to swallow him whole. But deep down, beneath the layers of rationalization and denial, a small voice whispered, "You shouldn't have left her." He silenced it, focusing instead on the road ahead. The town was hours away, and every minute spent driving felt like an eternity. By the time he arrived, the storm had lessened, but the damage was done. Roads were blocked, power lines downed, and the hospital staff were overwhelmed with emergencies. "There's no way we can get an ambulance up there," the on-call nurse told him, her expression apologetic. "The roads are still too dangerous." Michael's heart sank. He slumped into a chair in the waiting area, his mind racing. He had left Sarah in that cabin, in labor, in a storm. The image of her tear-streaked face haunted him, her cries echoing in his ears. But what could he do now? Returning to her without help would only confirm his failure. He stayed in the hospital overnight, restless and filled with dread. When the storm finally cleared the next morning, he hurried back to the cabin, praying he wasn't too late. The cabin was eerily quiet when Michael arrived. The door creaked as he pushed it open, revealing a scene of stillness that made his blood run cold. The fire had burned out, leaving the room frigid. A blood-stained blanket lay crumpled on the floor, a stark reminder of what had transpired in his absence. "Sarah," he called out, his voice trembling. "Sarah." There was no response. He searched the cabin and the surrounding area, his panic mounting with every passing second. But Sarah was nowhere to be found. It was as though she had vanished, leaving behind only the faintest traces of her struggle. Desperate, Michael reported her as missing to the authorities, but weeks turned into months with no leads. Eventually, the search was called off, and Michael was left to grapple with the weight of his choices. In his mind, Sarah and their unborn child were gone, their fate a grim mystery he would carry for the rest of his life. To cope, Michael buried himself in his work, climbing the ranks of the medical field with a single-minded determination. His name became synonymous with brilliance and success, yet his personal life remained a hollow shell. No amount of accolades could fill the void left by that fateful night in the cabin. He told himself he had done what he thought was best, but the guilt lingered, a shadow that followed him everywhere. And though he tried to forget, the memory of Sarah's tearful pleas and the haunting silence of the cabin refused to fade. Years passed, but the memory of that fateful night in the cabin lingered like a ghost in Michael Hayes's mind. He had become one of the most respected surgeons in the country, his name synonymous with innovation and precision in the medical field. Yet, no accolades or titles could erase the gnawing guilt that festered within him. Michael's personal life had disintegrated. He avoided relationships, unable to shake the shadow of his past. In moments of solitude, he often wondered what had truly happened to Sarah. Had she survived? If so, where was she now? Those questions were a torment he could never answer. One day, a letter arrived that promised a new opportunity. St. Anne's Hospital, a world-renowned medical institution, invited Michael to interview for the prestigious position of Chief Medical Officer. It was a role that could solidify his legacy, a chance to rebuild a part of himself he had long believed irreparable. He accepted the offer without hesitation, eager to prove his worth yet again. St. Anne's Hospital was a marvel of modern medicine. Its towering glass structure reflected the morning sun, a symbol of hope and innovation. As Michael entered the building for his interview, he couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and nerves. He had faced countless challenges in his career, but something about this day felt different. He was greeted by a warm yet efficient administrator who escorted him to the conference room where the board of directors awaited. The room exuded sophistication, with its sleek furniture and walls adorned with plaques and awards. Michael took a seat, his confidence returning as he prepared to present his vision for the hospital. The door opened, and the board members entered one by one. Michael greeted them with polite nods until his gaze landed on the last person to walk in. His breath caught in his throat. It was her. Sarah Hayes stood before him, poised and composed, her tailored suit accentuating her commanding presence. Her eyes, once filled with vulnerability, now held a steely determination. The nameplate she placed on the table read, Dr. Sarah Hayes, Board Chair. Michael's world tilted. His mind raced to comprehend the impossible. Sarah was alive. Not only had she survived, but she had also thrived, rising to a position of power in one of the most respected hospitals in the country. He felt an overwhelming mixture of relief, shock, and guilt. The woman he had abandoned was no longer the vulnerable figure from his memories. Sarah's expression remained unreadable as she took her seat at the head of the table. Dr. Hayes, she said coolly, her voice devoid of warmth. We're pleased to have you here today. The formalities of the meeting began, but Michael struggled to focus. His rehearsed speech faltered as he felt Sarah's gaze on him. Every word he spoke felt inadequate under her scrutiny. The board members asked questions, but it was Sarah's silence that unnerved him the most. She was the only one who could dismantle his carefully constructed facade with a single word. When the meeting concluded, Michael lingered, unable to leave without addressing the elephant in the room. As the other members filed out, Sarah remained seated, her eyes fixed on him. Dr. Hayes, she said, her tone professional yet cold. May I have a word in private? Michael nodded, following her to her office. The room was as immaculate as she was, its walls lined with certificates and accolades. She closed the door behind them, the air between them thick with unspoken tension. Sarah, Michael began, his voice trembling. I thought you were dead, she finished for him, her expression unyielding. I'm sure you did. After all, you left me to die, didn't you? Her words hit him like a physical blow. I was scared, he stammered. I thought I was doing what was best. I thought you. You thought wrong, Sarah interrupted, her voice sharp. But let me fill in the blanks for you. That night, I delivered our son alone in that freezing cabin. I bled and screamed, thinking I wouldn't survive. But I did. A passing hiker found us the next morning and took us to safety. Everything I have now I built on my own. Without you. Michael's knees felt weak. Our son, he whispered, the words barely audible. Where is he? Sarah's lips curled into a bitter smile. He's thriving just like me. And he doesn't know who you are. As far as he's concerned, his father died in that storm. Michael felt a lump rise in his throat. Sarah, I made a mistake. Terrible mistake. Please let me make it right. She laughed, the sound devoid of humor. You think you can waltz back into our lives after everything? You think a few apologies will erase the years of pain and struggle? He had no answer. The weight of his actions pressed down on him, leaving him speechless. Let me make one thing clear, Sarah continued, her voice steady and cold. You don't get to make this about you. Whatever guilt you feel, whatever redemption you seek, that's your burden to carry. Not mine. Not my son's. Michael nodded, tears brimming in his eyes. I understand, he said quietly. I'm so sorry, Sarah. Sorry doesn't change the past, she replied, her gaze unwavering. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do. She opened the door, signaling the end of their conversation. Michael stepped out, his mind reeling. The woman he had once abandoned had become stronger than he could have ever imagined, and he was left to grapple with the consequences of his choices. As he walked out of the hospital, he couldn't help but look back, a sense of finality settling over him. Sarah and their son had moved on, and for the first time, Michael realized he had truly lost them. Michael Hayes sat alone in his dimly lit apartment, staring at the folder on his desk. It contained the details of his failed candidacy for the position at St. Anne's Hospital. More importantly, it marked the final, irrevocable fracture in his relationship with Sarah and the son he had never known. The silence in the room was oppressive, broken only by the occasional rustle of papers as he flipped through the documents. Sarah's words echoed in his mind. You don't get to make this about you. She was right, of course. For too long, Michael had been consumed by his own guilt, his own need for redemption, without considering the lives that had moved on without him. The memory of her icy stare and the quiet strength in her voice haunted him. She had survived against all odds, raising their son and building a career that eclipsed even his own. But Michael wasn't the type to give up, not completely. He had made a career out of solving impossible problems, and now he was determined to at least try to mend what he had broken. He couldn't undo the past, but perhaps he could contribute to the future. The next morning, Michael arrived at St. Anne's Hospital unannounced. The receptionist looked up from her desk, her brow furrowing. Dr. Hayes, she asked, clearly surprised. Do you have an appointment? No, Michael admitted, offering a small, disarming smile. But I was wondering if Dr. Sarah Hayes might have a moment to speak with me. The receptionist hesitated. I can't promise anything, she said, picking up the phone. Please wait here. Michael sat in the waiting area, his heart pounding. He knew the odds of Sarah agreeing to see him were slim, but he had to try. Minutes felt like hours until the receptionist finally returned. Dr. Hayes is busy, she said apologetically. But she left a message for you. She handed him a small envelope. Michael's hands trembled as he opened it, revealing a single handwritten note. Focus on what you can change, not what you've lost. Michael left the hospital feeling both rejected and inspired. Sarah's message, though brief, carried a weight he couldn't ignore. He realized that he couldn't force his way back into their lives. Instead, he decided to dedicate himself to something meaningful, a way to honor the family he had abandoned. Over the following weeks, Michael began volunteering at clinics in underserved communities. He offered free surgeries to patients who couldn't afford care, using his skills to make a tangible difference. Word of his efforts spread, and soon, he was approached by a non-profit organization looking to expand access to medical care in rural areas. Michael threw himself into the work, finding solace in the knowledge that he was helping others. One afternoon, as he prepared for a free clinic in a small town, Michael noticed a familiar figure in the crowd. It was a young man, tall and lean, with Sarah's sharp eyes and determined expression. The realization hit him like a freight train. This was his son. The young man approached, his gaze steady. "Dr. Hayes," he asked, his voice calm but firm. Michael nodded, his throat dry. "Yes. How can I help you?" The young man hesitated for a moment before speaking. "My name is Ethan. I heard about the work you've been doing here. It's impressive." Michael's heart swelled with a mix of pride and regret. "Thank you, Ethan. That means a lot." Ethan's expression softened slightly. "My mom told me about you," he said. "She said you were a great surgeon." I can see she was right. Michael swallowed hard, fighting back tears. "Then I made mistakes. Mistakes I can never undo. But I'm so proud of who you've become. And I'm sorry for everything." Ethan studied him for a long moment before nodding. "I'm not here for an apology," he said. "I just wanted to see for myself who you are now." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Michael standing alone, his heart heavy but hopeful. Months later, Michael received an invitation to an event at St. Anne's Hospital. It was a fundraiser for the rural medical initiative he had helped launch. As he entered the grand hall, he saw Sarah and Ethan across the room, their presence a stark reminder of what he had lost. But instead of approaching them, he stayed in the background, content to watch from afar. During the event, Sarah took the stage to deliver a speech. She spoke passionately about the importance of accessible healthcare and the power of resilience. Michael listened intently, his admiration for her growing with every word. "We all face moments that test us," Sarah said, her gaze sweeping the audience. "Moments that define who we are and who we choose to become. It's not about erasing the past. It's about building a better future." As the crowd erupted in applause, Michael felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. He would never fully atone for his mistakes, but he could live with the knowledge that he was doing everything in his power to make amends. And in the end, perhaps that was enough. Dear viewers, thank you for watching. If you like this story, please subscribe to our channel to receive more stories every day. Share with us what you think of this story and tell us where you're watching from.